Hey, good afternoon. Um, I'm David Madison. I am the Associate Curator of Education here at the Orlando Museum of Art, and welcome to Art Sandwiched In. Before we begin today's lecture, I'd like to just go over a few of the features in our Zoom webinar. The participant chat is the best place to share comments publicly with the group, but questions for Jillian should be posted in our Q&A feature. And to access the Q&A, you just need to navigate to the Q&A located at the bottom of your toolbar. We'll address those questions at the end of today's lecture. I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker. Jillian Marie Browning is an interdisciplinary artist pursuing themes of feminism, identity, and contemporary Black experience. Born in Ocala, Florida, they received a Bachelor of Science degree in photography from the University of Central Florida in 2012 and a Master of Fine Arts degree in studio art from Florida State University in 2015. They have exhibited their work nationally, and it is included in the permanent collections of the Center for Photography at Woodstock and the University of Maryland's David C. Driskell Center for the Study of Visual Arts and Culture of African Americans and the African Diaspora. They currently work for the School of Art and Art History at the University of Florida. Again, thank you for participating today, and a big virtual welcome to Jillian Marie Browning.
Hello, everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so before I kind of start talking a little bit more about my work personally, I wanted to give you a little bit of a history lesson when it comes to Black people in regards to photography. So during my time in school, I had to seek out artists that looked like me, to find inspiration in the work of others that would directly relate to me in a way that my peers did not have to. In much of society and education, the work of Black people is excluded and whiteness is the norm. So when it comes to photography and film photography specifically, there's something called Shirley cards. So from the mid-1950s to the 1970s, Kodak was the main supplier of commercial film. They had a monopoly on the industry and therefore set all of the standards. As a way to have consistency among photo labs, they started using something that was called a Shirley card. Shirley was what was the desired outcome when an image would look like. So Shirley was also always a white woman. It wasn't until the mid-1970s when companies started complaining about the lack of detail in things like wood grain and chocolate that Kodak developed a film that would represent darker tones accurately. In 1995, Kodak came out with its very first set of multiracial Shirley cards. And there was literally like a 40-year time span where the Shirley card was just a white woman, different white women, but still white women. And then in 1995 and 1996, we started getting multiracial Shirley cards. So yeah, 40 years until Kodak started to make an official guide for processing film for non-white skin tones. I bring this up because my background is in commercial photography. I worked commercially for years, and I knew early on that really wasn't for me. I had worked in photo labs, I worked in portrait studios, I've worked as a professional retoucher, and all of these places had the same sort of form of a Shirley card. That was supposed to be your ideal. Editing presets that were made for only light skin tones, lights in portrait studios that couldn't be adjusted. Therefore, they always underexposed any skin tone that was not light. And this was not in the 70s and 80s. This was in the mid 2000s when I was doing this. So still a standard, and it's still a standard in many places. That is why when I was approached by Kenya for doing the BLIXEL project, I immediately agreed. Yes, there is a need for Black representation within stock imagery, but not only that, there's a need for the correct representation and depiction of Black people in culture, period. I work with Kenya to provide an education on how to properly photograph skin tones and why things may look a certain way. It is often the case that Black people have to create what they want to see in the world, and that's exactly what Kenya is doing. So I've also made it my mission to use myself as representation and to be vocal in what I'm doing and why I'm doing it in my art. My work is primarily self-portraiture, but I do bring in members of my family occasionally if I need to. So when I first started making art, it was not my intention to only use myself. I'm gonna start a little bit of a video. So it wasn't my intention to only use myself, but the only goal I had was to be true to myself and make the work that I wanted to make and the work that I wanted to see in museums and galleries, and just at all, work I wanted to see literally at all. I wanted to make work about my experiences. And yes, my experiences are often universal to many Black people that are living in the South, but I also wanted to speak for anyone, but did not want to speak for anyone but myself. After a while, using myself and my body within my work became unquestionable. If I was going to be telling experiences about myself or about experiences that I had gone through, I was just going to use my body for that. I didn't want to use anybody else to tell my story, but I also didn't want to use my body to tell anybody else's story either. So when I went to graduate school, this is kind of one of the first projects that I did. I was getting into the idea of performance art because my background was in commercial photography. I had no other sort of background or even like knowledge on other types of art. I took my very first painting class in graduate school. In my undergrad program, it was only photography. That was it. So when I was kind of branching out into making other kinds of work while I was in graduate school, I was really drawn to doing video, but also performance art. So this is kind of my first and only live performance that I've ever done, called You're Pretty for a Fat Girl. And this particular one was sort of like a touch of me trying to make work that was specifically about myself. I was using things that were said to me by well-intentioned people or things that people thought that maybe I wanted to hear. So as I'm doing this project, I'm ripping off all these comments and then throwing them kind of aggressively on the ground. And I'm visibly uncomfortable in this situation because yes, it's something that's very personal. And at that point, I wasn't used to making all this personal work, but also I was in front of people for the first time. And that was also very nerve-wracking for me. This is sort of the aftermath of this particular project. This continuing with performance art type work. So this is a piece that I made in 2016 that was the summer before Trump was elected, but this is sort of a direct response to sort of the indignation of this sort of this flag meaning something my entire life, which is still a negative thing, but also sort of being the pinnacle for Southern Nazism, in my opinion. And the idea that I was seeing this flag every single day, even more so than normal. And as you grow up as a Black person in the South, you understand what the rebel flag is and what that flag means. And it doesn't necessarily have another connotation. So when I was basically with this project, I was creating a Black substance physically with like parts of my body, like spit and hair and things like that, but also charcoal, and making this Black substance where I was physically and also metaphorically covering my Blackness on top of this flag. And this is a still from this particular piece. So like I said, my background was primarily in photography, but as I started sort of going into my art process more and spending time in graduate school and thinking about what I wanted my art practice to be, I was really drawn to interdisciplinary things and sculptural things. So I started to really play around with other things, like things called alternative process. So there are these sort of non-silver photography processes that you can do, and ones that kind of create sculptural things. And that's what I was drawn to. So I took one alternative process class in undergrad, and I learned how to do emulsion lifts. And these are gel medium emulsion lifts. And this is kind of my first foray into that. These are relatively small. They're roughly like 11 inches tall. And they're laser prints that you coat in gel medium, and then you can rub all the paper off with water, and you get like a very skin-like elastic thing with your image attached to it. So for me, this was kind of familiar. It was still pictures. It's what I knew how to do, but then also creating a sculptural thing, but also things with still talking about race, still talking about my body, its skin, it's physically pictures of me. And so it was a little bit comfortable, but also a little bit uncomfortable. I also take a lot of reference images, and because I kind of basically know how to work primarily in photography, I took a lot of pictures that sometimes would never live as an actual image. They would just work as a reference image. This particular image, these particular sets of images were supposedly reference images for this project where I was making large skins that I was doing. But as I started kind of looking through them and seeing what they were, I decided that they also could live as an image, as a landscape, as like a topographic image of like what my body looks like and what I am as a person. because like I said, representation is extremely important to me. And when I was looking for inspiration when I was in school, I was trying to look for people that look like me, not only skin tone, but also body type. I was looking for people with genderqueer bodies. I was looking for people with fat bodies. I was looking for people with sort of like non-perfect ideal bodies. And you don't necessarily see that often. So I was like, all right, cool. I'm going to do that. So I use these images to make these sort of larger skins. These are 36 by 48, so you can do large, prints of these. And I also learned too, kind of as I got into my method, that these can get really tattered, these can get ripped, these can get, kind of violent. And so that's what I was sort of referencing when I was doing this particular piece. So in 2017, I got a residency at the Center for Photography at Woodstock to create more of these skins and do a project with them. This particular residency is made for photography, so there weren't necessarily resources there for me to be making sculptural work. So I was there sort of making my own studio and making my own things to then think of something that I could do with these that was maybe a little bit different than what I was normally doing with the skins at the time, which was kind of just like showing them in a gallery. So that led me to this particular piece. So this is called Southern Trees Bear Strange Fruit. All right, so I played a little bit of that sound, so some of you may recognize that. So that is Billie Holiday's "Strange Fruit." So when I was doing this residency, this is in upstate New York. So I had a lot of people who were coming to me and they were kind of like wanting to talk to me about the work that I was creating. This is a residency for primarily people of color. So there's always going to be people who want to talk to you about your work there. It's a very small town. It's a tourist destination. But also when I was there, I did not see like any other Black people at all during this time. I was by myself in this place I've never been before, and there was no one there that looked like me. And I started having a conversation with some of the people who worked at the art center, and they were telling me that, like, yeah, this is the North, this is upstate New York, but if you go farther up in the mountains and into the pine forest, you'll start seeing rebel flags. You'll start seeing, kind of what looks a little more familiar to you growing up in the South. So as I started talking to kind of more people in the town, I kind of asked them about that. I got someone to take me up into the pine forest, and I hung the skins up in the forest, and I started taking video of them as they swung and as they kind of fell and as they sort of got more tattered being in this pine forest. And so talking about the idea that, yes, we kind of have this thought that the South is this terrible racist place, but it doesn't stop there. There's not a line that you hit like we're taught in school, even that where all of a sudden now everything above that line is going to be great and wonderful and accepting of everybody. Also during that residency, I was, like I said, dealing with a lot of thoughts of being alone and like there not being anyone there that I could relate to or talk to. I was also staying in this tiny house by myself with like no car or anything. So I was dealing with a lot of thoughts of isolation and kind of making work within that. And kind of what that meant when I was there and what that meant to my artistic practice. Because even though I do photograph myself primarily, I'm a self-portrait artist. I also I don't feel like I isolate myself necessarily. I have a bubble of people that I hang out with, but I also often make my work alone. But when I was kind of forced to make work alone, it was interesting to kind of think about, to kind of be with your thoughts by yourself for 30 days and being told to make art and that's like your only job. So it was something I was dealing with then too. More of this work on isolation. So as I kind of go in from this into now sort of a body of work that I've been working on for the last couple of years using a process that's called cyanotype. So this particular piece is called Matriarchal Line. And like I said, I am primarily a self-portrait artist, but I do bring in my family when I really need them to. So this particular piece is a piece about hair within Black culture and particularly my family's culture and natural hair specifically. So with this piece, I took hair from my mother, my two sisters, and myself, and I made cyanotypes out of them. Cyanotype is a contact printing process where you coat a light sensitive material on top of like any sort of porous thing. So these are on fabric. And then you place an object or a negative on top, you expose that to the sun, and anything that doesn't get any light touching it will stay white. So that's kind of what these are. So this is my hair, like I said, my mother's hair and my two sisters. I grew up in a very women-led family. I only have sisters. My dad's like the only man in our family. And so it's been very female driven forever. We're very strong-willed and we're just very strong people. And so when I was making this project, I really wanted to kind of get scientific with it, as like this is like a chemistry process, but also when I started making them, I started noticing that they looked a lot like DNA strands or like things growing in a petri dish because of their round nature. And also looking at the idea that natural hair in the black community, because went natural. Now it's much more common for black women to just have natural hair. But when I went natural, I was 15 years old. That was right before there was so many natural hair products, where there was a YouTube tutorial for literally everything about black hair. And so I went natural first. My mother is, as much as I love her, she was very concerned about how people were going to react to me not having straight hair. She was concerned about professionalism. She was concerned about literally looking ugly. That was a thing she was very concerned about. So when I went natural, it took a couple of years, and then my older sister, then my little sister, then my mother. And it's really interesting to see that like there are these 4 women in this family, and we all have a different hair texture. And that was something that I was really interested in, as kind of I've seen all of our process. Also, the idea of when I went natural at 15 years old, I didn't even know what my hair looked like. I got my very first chemical relaxer at 5 years old, and I had literally been getting my hair straightened for 10 years during that time. I had no idea what my hair texture was. So I just started doing this project and kind of like making it, getting hair from my family and getting any sort of a woman in general to cut pieces of their hair off is like asking them to cut a whole entire limb off. So that was extremely hard. But I basically told them that if they didn't love me unless they gave me a piece of their hair. So I got them to give me hair, and I started doing kind of these studies on the hair texture and what that looked like within this idea of womanhood, also female craft, by doing like embroidery hoops. I grew up in a very sort of traditional female-led family where like my mother, like she sewed, she did all that stuff. I learned how to cook and clean and sew as a young child. That was something that we just kind of like learned how to do, and I'm sort of addressing that in this particular project. And also it's really fun to see how I know what everybody's hair looks like within this, because I mean I did this project, but also all of our hair looks different, so I could pick out whose hair belongs to whom within the piece. And also there are a couple of them where I kind of mix all the hair together and then would make one print out of it. Also touching on hair, I did this particular piece that's called Run Your Fingers Through My Hair. And when I was doing this piece, I had straightened my hair for the first time in probably 8 years. And so I had my hair straightened, and I wanted to kind of just talk about the idea of basically texture and what that is, and kind of like the idea that a long, straight, flowy hair is considered the most beautiful hair. And like, what does that mean for the hair that I have? And when it comes to black hair in general too, I would say that a lot of people would consider my hair to be good hair. I have about 3C hair, so it's a little bit of a looser curl pattern, not quite as tight or coily. But then as you can see, like I'm running my hands through it, my hands are getting caught. I can't necessarily do a lot with this hair. And then on the other hand, I have this straight hair that I'm running my hands through. And a little tip I like to tell when I talk about this work is that when I straightened my hair, I went to go show my mom, and she was like touching it and massaging it. And she said the words, "I'm so proud of you," as if she was so proud that I grew this hair and it was so straight and it was so pretty to her. And that was something that was very jarring, that I think a lot of people don't necessarily think about, but within the Black community and women in general, hair is 100% tied to your worth as a person and how beautiful you are and how people even see you out in society. And then again, playing on this idea of hair, but also idea of self-portraiture. I was doing this particular piece called Sweet Gentle Lady, based on this Langston Hughes poem. And I'm talking here a lot about female fragility, specifically white female fragility, but also the idea that Black women are considered to be, are considered, but also depicted as being extremely strong and not needing to be protected. And the idea that, you know, a lot of Black women need protection, and we are the least protected class of people. And so when I was doing this particular piece of cyanotypes, but I use bed sheets specifically. And when I'm doing a lot of my work, I like to make sure that every single piece of it is on purpose. So, you know, instead of using just cotton for these, I specifically got bed sheets because I want to talk about the idea of your bed in your home being a safe place. but also how a lot of times the violation or the sort of where you can feel the most betrayed will be the place that you feel the safest. So I was playing around with draping and softness and things when I was talking about this, when I was doing this particular body of work. And I've shown it a couple of different ways here, with it kind of being hung without the extra drapery. And then also I had an opportunity to kind of recreate this piece where I had some windows that I could use. So I wanted to play around with different kinds of softness. So for this one particularly, instead of kind of, using the fabric to be the softness, I used the transparency to be the softness and the drapery to talk about that softness and that desire for softness. And so this boils down into sort of an ongoing longer project that I'm doing with sort of these tapestries of my body. So this particular piece is called Transcendent. And I'm bringing back in the idea of talking about my family and my mother and my grandmother specifically, but also the connection that you often have with your family members, and this one's called descendants, so your descendants of people who made you, and how you came upon being in the world. When I made this piece, I kind of was still working through the ideas. This actually became, it's a piece in general, but it's kind of a sketch for kind of what I've made this year. And so here is some sort of in the process shots I like to show about this, because these are another contact printing process. So these are called solar fast, and they work just like cyanotype, but they're a different process where it's still a contact printing process, but it comes in colors. It's basically a light sensitive pigment that you can coat on something, and then you put a negative on top or objects, and it will create an image. So you see with these, I kind of get a nice sort of a crisp image. These are 6-foot long negatives that I was using. And because this printing process has to be done wet, I basically would get one chance to make an image. And if it didn't work, I would have to make a whole new negative. So this is kind of the the trash pile I had. I would make one and I would just throw these negatives, but also because I was working by myself and it's something you have to do out in the sunlight. I kind of had like a really short amount of time to get them done physically. Like I would coat the fabric, lay down the negative, drag it into the sun, and then, have like 6 minutes of processing time, rip that negative off and run and wash it so that things wouldn't get overexposed and all of that. So also too, as I was making this, it kind of also became the process of making it as well as the outcome of the project. And so when I made these sort of sets of images, I like to reuse imagery within a lot of my work as well. So when I had these images that I took particularly for that project, but then I also was like, well, what other ways can I use these? And I got invited to be a part of an exhibition that was about reproductive justice. And I started doing a lot of research on reproduction and reproduction rights and issues within Black women. And also too, as I get, I'm in my early 30s, so I'm at the age where people will always be asking like, when are you having kids? Are you having children? That sort of a deal. And so I started doing more research on like, so what are the pros of having a kid in this society or in this economic standing? And I started like finding articles and things about the maternal mortality rate of Black women, and how just because of our current like healthcare system and health biases, and even like the standard in which certain things are done, kind of bringing back to the Shirley card where whiteness is often the standard. There are certain diseases that Black women are more prone to that aren't tested for because white women are not prone to those diseases. There are certain things that you can get that will change the color of your skin, or like kind of a pattern of rashes and things like that, that maybe you won't see on someone who is not fair skinned. And so you do not know to check for those, or that could be the cause of an issue that was happening during their pregnancy, or anything like that. So literally the maternal mortality rate of Black women is 3 times that of white women in the United States. And also, I mean, those numbers change for Hispanic women, for Native women, all of that, because again, we live in a society where whiteness is often the standard. So when I was doing this project, I was thinking about like, okay, so the fact that I am even alive, period, is a miracle. And the idea that like my mother is alive is a miracle, my grandmother is alive is a miracle, because like I can get pregnant tomorrow and lose my child quickly just because of our healthcare, but also to things that are like the care in which people will give, and also the non-protection of Black women in this country. So as I was kind of developing this project, then I also started developing this project that I called Relative. So I was playing with these images that I'd gotten that I took for the other project, instead of kind of putting them together. These are digital, and I had, they were negatives, and then they were positives, and then they became cyanotypes. So when I was playing around with these, I was kind of working on this idea of like, how would they look, right? So I was like, okay, will they exist as digital prints? Will they exist as this? And then I started thinking about how they would exist in a process that I am spending more time doing right now, like cyanotypes. And thinking about the idea of relative and what that means. So relative is someone that you're related to, like by blood. Also, relative can be that someone that you are compared to. So when I started thinking about this project and doing sort of these sort of mixed together imageries, I started thinking about the idea of cells splitting and dividing, of you growing inside of your mother, and also like doing more research on like reproduction and things like that. I learned that a woman is born with the amount of ovum they will have for the rest of their life. So literally, when I was being like developed inside of my mother, that's all the ovum I will ever have. When my mother was being developed inside of my grandmother, that's all the ovum she will ever have. So literally, I was inside of my grandmother before my conception was ever even thought of. So I was honing into that, and talking about that when I'm doing this particular project, and sort of mixing into the idea of Mother Nature and all of these plants that I have here, and I'll kind of go to kind of the making of these. These are plants that I found on my parents' land. I was getting them on the side of the road. I was getting them from friends who were, ripping things off of trees they found to give to me to make this project. And I kind of like was playing with that. I think like where do these plants come from? What do they mean within relation to what the product that I'm doing? And kind of like what this idea of bringing nature into this process means. And so I have some process shots here so you kind of see. These are 8-foot panels, and they are 8-foot negatives that I would make. Actually, 10-foot panels, 8-foot negatives. And I would basically have to, coat these large sheets, large pieces of fabric, and then I would put the negatives down, and then I would put the plants down, and I had my best friend come and help me, and we would get like this. I had an 8-foot piece of plexiglass that we would hold down and clamp to just kind of like get nice prints, and they were 20-minute exposures that basically by the time I got one set up, I could set up a second one and then also get that printing. Also, this process was pretty laborious because I could only really do about 2 a day when the sun was in the right spot, and also if it was not raining. So again, it became a lot more of like the process in which I was making these, and the idea of like, giving birth, and also like how laborious the process was that I was making when I was making these. And this is kind of a shot of an installation, how big they are in relation to people, so you can kind of see. 14 of them exist, so I made about 14, and were quite large. They're currently on display at the Leesburg Center for the Arts. So this is an install shot from when we were doing that. But I like to add in that install shot and also these process shots, so you can kind of see sort of the size of them, but also, kind of like what that's like. You kind of walk into this space and you have all of these and how big they are. I want to make them larger than life. I'm not 6 feet tall. But then you can get close, and also their fabric. And at this particular installation, you can walk in between and around them, because I really wanted people to kind of get inside of them. I'm not the kind of artist that I'm like, well, I don't want you to touch my work. I want you to touch it. I want you to connect to it, and I want you to kind of see and feel it. And also because they're fabric, they kind of move around in the air conditioning and all of that. So you kind of get it's more tactile, and that's kind of what I'm more attracted to. So that's my most recent body of work that I've just been working on, and probably plan on continuing. But that is my entire talk. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to to send them to me. So
That was great. Thank you. It's the worst part of doing webinars. You can't clap for you at the end, but fantastic. And so I am interested and I have actually a lot of different questions for you, but if people who are watching right now want to ask Jillian a question, please go ahead and post that in the Q&A. I'm also monitoring the chat, but we'll be on the lookout for those. But Jillian, actually, I wanted to kind of begin with where you ended there. So much of your practice in terms of the way you're thinking through photography as a sort of a performative act, as less so as the camera as like a tool or a means to an end. It's very much so embodiment and performance, and utilizing that process to reflect on those concepts. And so you kind of teased it out there at the very end about the viewer. And so I'm wondering about how you conceptually address the viewer in the way that they could perform or interact with your work. And if you could just elaborate a little bit more
Yeah.
about that process.
Yeah. So, kind of the big question that a lot of people have when they make art is like, who is your audience, right? And so that was a big thing that I kind of struggled with when I was in school for art, was like, well, what's my audience? And, do I care who my audience is, right? And so, for a while I did care a lot, and I was like, I want people to be able to connect with what I'm doing. But after a while I started thinking, I don't actually care if people connect with it, because I'm making work specifically to sort of bridge a gap and make a representation that I didn't see. So I make my work for myself. But then I also know that there are a lot of people that do connect with that. And for me, it's more important that the work that I'm making is true to myself, but then also that if someone does, connect with it, I'm not trying to make it like commercially,
Sure.
everyone gets it. But if there's like 10 people that get it, that's awesome. That's great. I want to have those conversations with those people. But also, a big thing though too with my art is I want to make it very accessible. So I don't want it to seem like, nobody can do what I'm doing, or no one can see what I'm doing. Like, I'm not very big on like, don't touch the art, don't interact with the art. I'm very much like, if you want to touch it, you can touch it. Like, I don't make things that are fragile, but even things that I do make that are fragile, I mean, like those skins that I make, none of those exist anymore because they are not archival at all.
Yeah.
But like, but I mean, I have them. I've shown them plenty of times, just hanging in the middle. No, I want you to touch it. It looks tactile, so you can touch it. That's fine with me, because I think that like having that connection with art and making it accessible and knowing that it's not something that like has to be sacred and protected, like
Sure. Yeah.
it's something for everybody.
Yeah. Debunking that entire
Yeah.
sacred art myth. I shouldn't say that. I work for a museum. That's what we do. But yeah, I see that. I get that. I am interested in like your community too, and like so not just your viewer as like an abstract concept, but the community for which you are making this work, and you're participating in. I know you alluded to it at the beginning, the project with Kenya Robinson. If you want to just maybe talk about that a little bit more, that project with Kenya and
Yeah.
the
So
community that you are cultivating, I guess, surrounding.
yeah, so with BLIXEL, it's really important. Like when Kenya was talking to me about that, like it was important for me to like really like education is I'm an educator first. Like I'm an educator first, I'm an artist second. And so when Kenya was like, this is what I want to do with BLIXEL, I was like, all right, cool. I can give you like a ton of resources on how to properly photograph people. Because like I said, my background is in commercial photography. So I spent, like literally years of school, like this is how you photograph a person inside. This is how you photograph a person outside. This is how you photograph a person like this. This is how you photograph a person with one light or two light or three lights. Like it's very specific. So when we were talking about this and going through the project, I was like, okay, this is how you would do that, or this is the difference between like, your light meter saying that everything you're doing is middle gray, but the person you're photographing skin tone is not middle gray. And how do you fix that? Because I think so much stuff is standardized for like that middle gray, that like neutral, and so many people do not fit within that realm that there needs to be education on how to then get something that will look great for everybody, like that will work for everyone. Also, how to fix something, so that everyone will look good. But then also, sort of, that the means of wanting that representation, wanting to see yourself within things, like wanting to be able to like open a book and see someone that looks like you, or walk into a doctor's office and see someone that looks like you on the wall. It's not just the standard set of like white people smiling. It's everyone smiles, everyone has birthday parties, everybody has all of that stuff. So like that's when Kenya was like, BLIXEL's going to be this. I was like, I am so into that, and I want to try to help you as much as I can, like make this happen.
And there's so much growth that could occur with that project.
Mm-hmm.
It's really exciting as well. I know Kenya is focusing on people of African descent, right? for this particular iteration, but it would be interesting. And I think the project overall has highlighted that gap, that erasure, that absence, really, it's not erasure, it's an absence within photography. So thank you. And it does sound like you have the technical skill set too, right? That really, the understanding of that aspect. I do, so we have a question from Anne-Marie Furlong, who's watching right now, and she is wondering if you could talk about your work with still photography versus video. And have you considered making a video with those latest fabric cyanotypes? And I think I really reacted to watching the skin video that you created at Woodstock. I mean, I think it's a form of performance and a way of preserving those objects. Again, they're so fragile. You've said that, but video, yeah, this tension maybe.
So I mean, like I literally just, I mean, I conceptualized that project over like a couple of years, but I just made them, but like between January and the exhibition that I had to have for the beginning of March. So they're still very like new kind of and how they exist in general. So what I can do with them, I mean, I haven't stopped with the idea of what I can do with them. And I do have a lot of video that I took of them hanging, like of them moving kind of and people interacting with them. But so far as like, you know, if a piece will come of that, I'm not exactly sure yet. But I am really interested in also too, like showing the process of them being made and them being born and like how that looks and what that means. And I'm sort of like thinking about like, you know, it's still, long story short, I'm still conceptualizing a lot of that. But as far as right now, they kind of exist in the fabric panels, but also, you know, with the video work, like a lot of when I was making video work was because I didn't fully know how to step away from using a camera as like the actual end piece yet, you know, like I think I'm more comfortable kind of doing other things now. But when I was making video work, it was like, I know that I don't want to take a picture, but I also want it to be something else, and possibly even like a projection or a video seems more tactile to me than like a picture printed on paper. So I kind of use video work as a little bit of a crutch for a couple of years. But I think I'm, you know, there definitely are more things I can do with it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. Like I said, I really responded to that hunting video that you created. And I did want to ask, I asked this question of Lajoune McMillan, and if anyone else wants to chime in, and Lajoune is also participating in the Restock Image project with you in Kenya. And I'm interested in mentorship and how mentorship has affected your practice. And Lajoune's work is very collaborative by necessity, right? She's dealing with so many different kind of moving parts and technologies, and so she has to have kind of all of these different collaborators, whereas your work, like you've even talked about it or hinted at it about isolation and solitude, and you've been able to kind of reflect and create these works for yourself. And so maybe collaboration, but also this notion of mentorship, right? And who has, and I know you've said Langston Hughes, you've said Billie Holiday, you've made references there, but maybe has mentorship affected your trajectory as an artist?
Yeah, so when I was kind of talking about like not being able to see people that look like me in art, and like during my education, like just there just wasn't a lot of it like that my faculty could even tell me. So I was just finding people on the internet. And that's actually how I found Kenya. When I was in graduate school, I was literally, I think I Googled the word like Black female performance artists. And like, I found some work of Kenya. And like, you know, later on in the years, like a couple of years ago, we actually got introduced, which is, you know, wild to me because I was like, I wrote about you in my master's thesis, and now you're like in front of me as a real human being. I never thought I actually physically talked to you. But me and Kenya have, you know, she's stated to me that like, you know, they want to have that connection and that sense of community and all of that. And like, that's something that I'm very interested in. And Kenya has been like, even in like the time that we've been collaborating on this project, has, you know, given me so much really good advice for, you know, like them understanding like where I'm at in my career currently, and like, you know, and what that could mean for me. They've been like very open with all of that, which has been so great and so wonderful. And I've also met a bunch of other women who, you know, reach out to me. I think I have an issue reaching out to people. I'm always just like, you know, I'm by myself, but people have reached out to me to help me or want to, you know, talk to me about it. And I think that that's that's been really helpful for me a lot. And when it comes to like the work that I produce, I do sort of like to talk to people about it. So a lot of times I'll work through ideas with my best friend and just have like spit out stuff, at her to like get ideas flowing and stuff like that. So that is really helpful because I can get kind of inside of my head a little bit. But also for me, like I know that I say like, oh, I don't really reach out to people for like my own advice, but I am very much open to talking to other people about their work. Like again, I work in education, so like I'm constantly trying to like make sure that I am there for students or there for people who want someone to talk to. Because like I said, I know what it's like to feel not supported or not see myself within the work that's being given to me while I'm at an institution. So a lot of times students will come to me because they know the kind of work that I make, and maybe they're working on a similar project idea, or they have similar themes within their work and they want to come and talk to me about it. And I am more than happy to talk to them about that. And I tell that to any random person that emails me, like, I'm so into talking to you about your work. Please ask me about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to ask because you are within a college system, and so education, of course, has to have been it has to be important to you.
Yes.
But so in addition to reaching out to other mentors and kind of not being intimidated to do that, what other advice would you give to a young artist of color?
I would
starting out.
Yeah, I would say literally be true to who you are. And like, I really do tell this to a lot of students that like I definitely got like some pushback when I was trying to make work that was like pretty racial or about my body or things like that, or like things that nobody could relate to. Like I had a ton of critiques that no one said anything about anything that I was making. They had nothing they could add to it because they didn't connect with it. They didn't know. But like continue to do that, because I definitely could have changed the trajectory of my art making or my career or anything like that. I could have done that, but I stuck to my guns and I refused to do that. And I think that I am a better artist for that, for continuing to make the art that I wanted to make while I was, doing that stuff. But also, again, like, don't be afraid to reach out to people. Like, most artists are super nice and they want to talk to you. Like, it's not going to be a weird situation. Like, I have had a ton of really wonderful studio visits and like Zoom calls with people who I never thought I would like be able to talk to. But I mean, like, if they're a living artist, you can send them an email and I'm pretty sure they will get back to you and talk to you about that kind of thing.
Love that advice.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, this has been so wonderful. I've just really enjoyed visiting with you and La Journée, and I just cannot wait to see what happens with this project, the Restock Image Collection. So looking forward to that. And thank you so much for sharing your time and
Thank you for having me.
our community. And yeah, absolutely. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day. All right. Bye.
Bye.